The Strathmere Group have been gobbling up our tax dollars. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and today I'd like to run through one of Parker Gallant's latest blog posts. The Strathmere Group has been gobbling up our tax dollars. Now, you may wonder, who is Parker Gallant? He's a retired former international banker. He writes a number of columns on his own blog post, and he's contributed to the Financial Post and other newspapers and organizations across Canada. And he's been keeping an eye on environmental, non-governmental organizations and their funding for many years. So he's just done a recap of current revenues that these folks are getting from federal, provincial, and municipal governments. So let me explain a bit about who the Strathmere Group is, and let's have a look at the numbers. So join me on this little journey. So who is the Strathmere Group? Well, it's a loose association of environmental, non-governmental groups that do coordinated campaign activities. So Parker wrote this some years ago, and he noted that the kind of influence that they have is they're about 11 member organizations. They have over 358,000 members, 420 staff, and annual budgets totaling over $50 million. And there's an example of the scope of their influence on the Boothroyd agency site. Apparently Strathmere is one of their clients. So they list Greenpeace, Pembina Institute, World Wild Fund, et al. And they said that in 2014, we, that being Boothroyd, planned and facilitated the Toronto Skills Building Workshop, Campaigns and Communications 2014, where directors from Canada's 12 leading environmental organizations learned from leading market researchers, journalists, and organizers, and agreed to work on shared frames and messages in advance of the 2015 election. So here's Parker's recent blog that I'm going to read to you with his permission. The Strathmere Group have been gobbling up our tax dollars. As pointed out in a series of 11 articles starting back in September 2020 and concluding in September 21, the Strathmere Group consists of 10 charities and 2 not-for-profit entities. We're out to save the world from climate change. The history of the group and their partnership with each other, as well as 21 U.S. environmental groups, was inspired by none other than then Jerry DeMarco, who is at present the Federal Environmental Commissioner in the Auditor General's office. A paper written by DeMarco stated, environmental non-governmental organizations must overcome the silos, isolating them from one another in order to think and act like a movement. And needless to say, with some minor shuffles in the Strathmere Group, they certainly overcame the silo and now benefit substantially with our tax dollars, while we taxpayers suffer the consequences of their agenda, which has been totally endorsed by the current minority federal Liberal government and supported by the NDP. The Strathmere Group and their leaders in 2009 were Rick Bates of Canadian Wildlife Federation, Gerald Butts, World Wild Fund Canada, Bruce Cox, Greenpeace Canada, Stephen Hazel, Sierra Club Canada, Eric Hebert-Daly, Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, Bob Oliver, Pollution Pro, Devin Page, Executive Director, Eco-Justice, Marlo Reynolds, Pembina Institute, Sydney Ribault, Equiterre, Peter Robinson, David Suzuki Foundation, Graham Saul, Climate Action Network Canada, and Rick Smith, Environmental Defence Canada. So you can see by their logos, you probably recognize most of them. And the ones ticked off are actually members of the Strathmere group or alliance. The others probably fall under the umbrella of CANRAC, the Canadian or Climate Action Network. So Gerald Butts, Marlo Reynolds, and Rick Smith, they were highlighted in the list prior. So Butts will be remembered as being Trudeau's right-hand man and also responsible for the Green Energy Act, pushing renewable energy in Ontario and doubling electricity bills. Reynolds should be regarded as primarily responsible for the Strathmere Group's formation and mandate. Reynolds was also a losing Liberal candidate in the 2015 federal election, but despite that, became Chief of Staff in 2015 under Catherine McKenna when she was Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Rick Smith moved on from President of Environmental Defense to become President of the Canadian Climate Institute, created by the Trudeau government with $20 million of our tax dollars to push the net zero agenda. And it looks like now Marlo Reynolds is an executive in residence at ARC Financial. Now, Parker pointed out something kind of interesting about that. Because their website states ARC is focused on investing in conventional oil and gas and in sustainable energy industries. Located in Calgary, the heart of Canadian energy sector, ARC has access to attractive, competitive opportunities and a pool of talented and experienced entrepreneurs. It appears Reynolds has been hired to, presumably, get ARC to exit the oil and gas sector and move their $6 billion portfolio into those wind, solar, and hydrogen renewable developments that he, Marlo, was pushing when Chief of Staff in his former position, which presumably included doling out government grants. Surely someone dedicated to the philosophy he visualized when creating the Strathmere Group will continue his life's mission in his new job. Our tax dollars going to the Strathmere Group members. As it has been well over 2 years since the series of articles about the Strathmere Group, it's worth looking back over the past 5 years to see if our tax dollars have found their way into the pockets of the 10 charities. So while there are 12 members in the group, the charitable status excludes Greenpeace and the Climate Action Network. The latter, Climate Action Network, is simply an association of ENGO, environmental non-governmental organizations, whereas Greenpeace lost or gave up their charitable status when being investigated by the CRA. That was quite a few years ago. And there was a recent investigation that was also reviewing others in the Strathmere Group, including the David Suzuki Foundation, Pembina Foundation, Environmental Defense, and Ecoterre, whose co-founder was reputedly none other than our current Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault. But the Liberals suspend tax audits of political charities. Yes, when Justin Trudeau, Liberal-led party, won the majority in 2015, one of the early things that happened was the investigation suddenly disappeared. So, CRA filings. Accordingly, with the above in mind and the stature of some of those signatures on the Strathmere Declaration having risen to places of influence within the bureaucracy of the federal government, a review of the charity filings seemed logical. A look over the past 5 years of CRA charitable filings was therefore executed, along with the review of grants and contributions and federal contracts websites. So I just want to say here that so all this information that I'm going to be presenting, Parker has put together from publicly available material posted on public websites. What he's done is what, most regular people don't have the time or interest to do, to go through these different websites and to gather all of the contract all of the donations, grants, and what have you, and compile them all so that you can actually see the sum totals that are going to these groups. And I have to tell you, the numbers are really staggering. You know, if you see that a group gets a grant for, I don't know, $10,000, $50,000, even $100,000, okay, you know, it's big money to most little people like us, like me, but you know, for in the scale of things of government, it's not that big. But when you add it all together, it's staggering. But let's look and see. So what was discovered? In the CRA filings, according to the 5 years of CRA filings by the 10 charities, they reported having received $51,444,000 from the federal government, $14,985,000 from provincial governments, and $677,000 from municipal governments. We continue with 1B. Those 10 charities over the 5 years have also received $81,723,000 from other Canadian charities, plus another $45,208,000 from foreign parties, with a portion of those receipts also receiving tax receipts. And a continuation of the CRA filings. So 1C, I'm just giving you these numbers for the sections, because if you want to read it online, you'll have the reference. Collectively, the 10 charities received tax receipted donations of $253,859,000. But 2 of the 10 charities, World Wildlife Fund and Canadian Wildlife Federation, received 60% of that money, or $152,018,000 of the foregoing, with the other 8 charities receiving the remaining 40%. So those donations saved the contributors approximately $190.4 million in taxes. That would be 75% of the contributions, meaning the federal government deficit increased with absolutely no benefit to ordinary Canadian citizens via improvements to the healthcare system, reducing poverty, etc. So just to check back with people here, if you're not familiar how the charitable tax system works, when you donate to a charity, the person who donates the money gets a tax receipt if it's over a certain amount, usually over $20, but sometimes there are other parameters. And the amount of tax deduction that they get to claim for that does vary a bit, I believe, by different jurisdictions. But the point being that if I donate $100,000 to you, and then I get to write off a very large part of that donation from my taxes, that means I don't give $100,000 to the government if I owe them that, because I get the tax write-off because I donated to a charity. So if you understand, these kinds of numbers mean that there's a very large drain on the federal government's money pool, if you like, where the tax pool, where we all normally put our money, so that then we have a tax pool where the money is doled out for things like healthcare and education and such like. So I just wanted to make that clear, because not everybody is into all these tax benefits, and that's a very plain language discussion on my part. You should probably have a look at Bloomberg Charity Law, B-L-U-M-B-E-R. Mark Bloomberg, he and his firm do a very good job of discussing all aspects of charitable law and charities, so you can get much more accurate material from there than from what I just said. So there are also federal grants and contracts in Part 2. So aside from getting all these tax donations and tax subsidies and revenues from the government, they get these federal grants and contributions. Those 10 charities have been granted $48,229,000 over the past 5 years. And via the contracts website, they were awarded federal contracts of $1,826,000. So in summary, just looking at the effect on tax revenues, the 10 charities comprising the Strathmere Group basically were responsible for consuming $257.6 million of our potential and actual tax dollars over those 5 years. Those 10 ENGOs are but a small portion of the active ENGOs, of whom most are charities and receive tax dollars either directly via grants or they benefit from the tax deduction used by their contributors. The Climate Action Network, a Strathmere Group member, has almost 150 members, including such well-known names as CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees. So how did this number come into being? This is the calculation. So foregone taxes of $190.4 million plus federal grants of $51.4 million plus provincial grants of $15 million plus $700,000 of municipal grants equals $257.6 million. So that's how Parker arrived at that number. And just to give you a sense of CUPE, CANRAC, and Climate Action, you can see here, this is CANRAC's site, and you can browse the members by location, so you can go through and see by province who's who. And of course, they're calling for take action to combat climate change. So just imagine there, here it states that there's 140 organizations. That fluctuates a little bit, I think, but you know, you should go through the list and think. So you've got these 10 Strathmere charities, and then you've got CANRAC with 140 organizations, and they're all under the same umbrella. And inside CANRAC, you've got CUPE, and they're all climate activists as well. In fact, some parts of CUPE have been blocking Keystone XL and TMX for many years. So it's really all about green crony capitalists, because other organizations such as the Canadian Environmental Network also have members in regional groups by provinces, but the website goodwork.ca goes well beyond the CAN or CEN by linking to various provincial organizations as well as green business and environment industry associations. So we should be confident that the hundreds of ENGO and renewable energy companies spread across the country are enjoying the benefits provided by all of the individuals and businesses whose tax dollars they receive. So the Strathmere Group merely highlights the waste of our tax dollars to achieve the net zero target of emissions for Canada, when we represent only 1.5% of global emissions. Destroying Canada's economic well-being will not change the temperature. And you can see here, this is an excerpt from a report by Robert Lyman called Futile Folly. And in it, he shows that China emits in 1 month what Canada emits in 1.5 years. So even if we were completely wiped off the map, let alone reducing our emissions, there'd be no difference in climate change or global emissions. So if you'd like to know a bit more about these organizations, we did a series of reports in 2019 with Robert Lyman, and each of these lay out a different aspect of the influence of these large environmental groups. Now, these reports tend to look at the top 40 environmental groups. And of course, there are many, many more, as Parker just said. But the first one is Money Matters, the ENGO Political Advantage. The second is Green Money, a glimpse behind the green funding machine. Then we have Big Green Money versus Conventional Energy Advocates, the pro versus no. This looks at the different funding arrangements. And then we have the Green Titanic, how Big Green Money's political power was unleashed. Yes, they're very potent politically. So if you enjoyed our presentation, we're celebrating now our 21st year of operation, and we'd love it if you would donate $21 to celebrate as we enter our 21st year of operation. You can see our early documentary, Climate Catastrophe Cancelled, if you'd like. It's online. And you can peruse our website and learn much more about climate. We've got lots of things. Our climate essay is quite interesting for people interested in the science aspect. It's fairly technical, although it is a plain language read for most people. Climate Change 101 is our bilingual youth-oriented site, and lots of people like that because it is plain language and kind of fun graphics. We have a very comprehensive library, and we've got lots of material on our website, so check it out. We've got a blog, lots of new reports and new postings all the time. So help us educate the public. You can join us, you can donate, you can sponsor activities, and you can just share our stuff. On our website, we've got a donate and a join button. And you can also just send us an e-transfer if you want. contact@friendsofscience.org, or you can call into the office. So that's a wrap for Parker Gallant's essay on the Strathmere group gobbling up our tax dollars. Parker writes really good articles all the time about the crazy energy policies in Canada and the green crony capitalists and ENGOs that are really draining your wallet and our tax pool all at the same time. So I invite you to have a look at Parker Gallant's blog. And I thank Parker for allowing me to do this read. I know some people prefer to have material like this read to them, or they can put it on as a podcast and just listen to it in the background. And some people like to be able to go through and stop and look at sections. So that's one reason why I wanted to read it. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.